Hello and welcome to Improving Scottish Football. My name is Kieran and this episode is number 20. We have been on this journey since June of last year, 2023, and we've got to the big 2-0, which feels like quite a big number, I think. So for this episode, we're actually going to be doing something a little bit different. This is kind of a look back on our previous conversations, and we're going to do a bit of a stock check of where we've kind of come to. But there's also another reason for changing things up a little bit in this episode, which is a personal reason, and that is that my wife has given birth to our second son, and he's come several weeks earlier than we were expecting. So everyone's doing well, but obviously got my hands full a little bit. I've got a newborn chilling in the neonatal ward. I've got a toddler who is just wanting to wrestle me constantly, and I run my own business. So it's busy times, but good times. So this episode, there is no guest. It's going to be looking back on everything that has come before. And specifically, it's going to be an amalgamation of my favourite answers to the magic wand question, which, if you're not familiar with the podcast, at the end of every episode I ask, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about Scottish football, what would it be? If this is your first time hearing the podcast, it's probably a good episode to join in on. It will hopefully give you a flavour of all the chats we've been having. And I would encourage everyone to go and check out the back catalogue. I really think they're worth listening to, especially as they don't really go out of date. You know, rarely are we discussing the weekend's games. And of course, because Scottish football doesn't change, things we covered almost a year ago are just as applicable today as they were back then. So I promise I will be back with regular episodes in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, enjoy this one. Please do share it, leave it a 5-star review if you can, and subscribe and comment and like and all that sort of stuff. Let's keep this going. Let's improve Scottish football. So first up, we are going to go all the way back to episode 1, which featured John Walker. So big shout out to John. He is an analyst and he also runs the Scots Abroad podcast. So John was a big supporter of the podcast right from the off, and his support was a big reason that it's got to the level it is at now. So this is what John said when I asked him the one thing that he would change about Scottish football.
I would distribute the money based on the teams that have played the most Scottish under-23 players throughout a season. So if Hibs had played more under-23 players than Rangers had or Celtic had throughout that season, Hibs get the bigger portion of the pot from the TV deal outside the prize money for winning league. I would incentivise, on top of that, incentivise youth players playing. The MLS give people, I think it's $5,000 every time an under-21 plays in the MLS. A team get $5,000 from the American FA. That would be, if I had a magic wand or I had the fund available, there would be a pot split up for teams who play the most Scottish under-23 players in a season, and every time somebody from the academy under-21s played in a first team game, you got a $2,000 reward.
So there we go. That was John. Now, I think that's been echoed in quite a few episodes, to be honest, that I've recorded. And for me, it's a no-brainer. We need to incentivise clubs to play Scottish players, or we make it a rule. We need to get more Scottish players playing. We need to get more young Scottish players playing. And it's just not happening at the moment. And the numbers are frankly embarrassing. Like, some Scottish Premiership teams turn out starting 11s that don't have any Scottish players at all. Now, the English Premiership have a homegrown player rule. 8 out of the 25 matchday squad have to be homegrown. So why don't we? It was recommended in the McLeish report. And the other thing is, it's really easy to do, right? This isn't hard, and it will benefit Scottish football and obviously the Scottish national team as well. So obviously you can phase it in and make it relatively painless, but honestly, a bit of a no-brainer. Let's get on it, guys. Next up is from episode 4. So this is Alex Marr, who runs SPFL Media Watch on Twitter. Again, another legend. This is what he said he would change if he had a magic wand.
I think it would be, well, I'd love to say it to give Scottish football $1 billion a year TV deal, but I think that's probably unrealistic. I think for me it would be for the people in charge of Scottish football to think about how the game is viewed, both in a marketing aspect, but both in a broadcasting aspect as well. Both how do we watch the game, how do we consume the game, and how is that changing as we move into the 2020s and into the 2030s. That needs to be the priority, and making the most of that needs to be the priority. That's the way that's going to, I was going to say that's going to make Scottish football great again, but that sounds very Trumpian. That's what's going to bring in the most revenue, make the clubs better. That's what's going to end up in having, I think if you can unlock that and you can make the most of that, so many more benefits will come your way because of it.
So there we go. That was Alex. And as he says there, we need to look ahead. You know, the media landscape is changing so rapidly, and we need to be ready for what's ahead. This is not the 1990s anymore. It's not the 2000s anymore. It's not the 2010s anymore. Things are moving at such a quick pace. So we shouldn't just automatically look to sign another 5-year deal that is very similar to what we've done before. We have to be looking ahead. We have to be ready to capitalize on the changing landscape. Now, there's a great quote which probably sums up my feelings on Scottish football more than anything else. And I don't know if I've carted this out already on a previous episode or not, but it's a quote from JFK. He said, "Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past and present are certain to miss the future." Now, well, I mean, there's not that much more I can add to it, but you know, we literally just can't be just looking back and looking at the current landscape. We have to look ahead, because otherwise we are just going to fall further and further behind. Okay, next magic wand answer is from episode 6, and this was David McDonald, who of course runs Pie and Bovril. This is what he had to say.
If it was a magic wand, it would be having a league that wasn't completely dominated by 2 teams. You know, that would be my dream, would be that we'd have a league that even 3, 4, 5 teams could potentially win. I think that's the one thing. When you're going into a new season, you don't have that dream. You don't have that dream that it could happen. You know, obviously it happened down south with like Leicester, but it's not really the same because they were still throwing hundreds of millions at it. In Scotland, it just feels, it kills me a little bit that, what was it, 1983? 1983?
It was 84, 85.
84, 85. So pretty much since I was 12 years old, I've never known anybody else win the Premiership or the Premier League, and that kills me a little bit. I'd love, even if it wasn't my team, I'd love to see a team go for it, and even if they didn't win it, at least run them close. We've not had it for so long. What, 1990 Aberdeen, probably the closest we've had. That would be my magic wand, but all the 2 of them bugger off, and we have it in reverse, which I actually, joking aside, and I think that will happen eventually. I think they will eventually go to some sort of European league. Whether they leave something behind, I don't know, but I definitely think that'll happen. That's been talked about a million times, but eventually I can see something happening there.
So this has come up a few times with guests, and obviously definitely needs a magic wand for this one. But it's been interesting for me how many times it's come up. I don't really have an answer for it, of course. It's a bit of a big issue and not an easy fix, but a lot of food for thought. next up from episode 7, we have got Graham Taylor. Now, episode 7 is one of my favourites, and it was all about league reconstruction. Now, this isn't league reconstruction as in, whoa, we need to do league reconstruction. This was like a proper breakdown of the maths and how we could actually make it work. And it was a proper dig into whether a 14-team league would be best, a 16-team, 18-team, or 20-team league, which would work best for our country. I would really encourage you, if you haven't listened to that podcast episode before, go and have a listen to it. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a bit geeky and a bit nerdy, but to be honest, if you're listening to this podcast anyway, you already fall into that category, I'm sorry to tell you. So go and dig it out. That podcast episode also looks at some other countries and what they're doing. So it looks at the Belgian system, it looks at the Romanian league, the Greek league. It's a bit of a favourite of mine. Anyway, this is what Graham had to say when I asked him if he had a magic wand, what's the one thing he would change about Scottish football?
My biggest gripe with Scottish football just now is the 11-1 voting structure that's present within the Premier League. I can't believe this because it puts me on the side of Michael Stewart, which never happens. But historically, that 11-1 voting structure has been one of the biggest blockers of change and I would argue progress in Scottish football. And again, in my view, it allows Rangers and Celtic to work in their own interest to keep themselves at the top of the Scottish game. So I think if we were to scrap that 11-1 voting structure, it removes that capacity to vote tactically, and it could really help usher in some change. I think past reconstruction votes were denied, and it's denied by 2 teams. But in an article that, again, it's an old article that I was looking through doing some research for coming on to answer this question, the same 2 teams that would then vote against similar proposals. Like there's a proposal to change the 11-1 to a 9-3. And the same 2 teams that voted against reconstruction in the first place voted against the voting changes. So,
well, this is it. How do you ever get rid of it if it needs an 11-1 vote to get rid of the 11-1 vote?
Somebody just needs to pull a US presidency and just use executive powers and push something through and say this is non-negotiable. This is a change that's being made for the benefit of all, not a few. Again, does anybody have the clout to do that in the Scottish game? Not currently, I would argue. And with the governance that, again, with some of the governance we've seen in recent years, I don't see it happening. I don't think anyone would try and force that through, unfortunately. So that's why I need my magic wand for that one.
Yeah, that is definitely in need of a magic wand. It's also worth saying, I think Aberdeen voted, when Rangers were not in the top flight, I think Aberdeen voted with Celtic.
Yeah, and it's just a shame. It only takes one team to decide to partner up with somebody else. And it could be for anything. I mean, I've kind of picked on the old firm. But as I mentioned, it could be any 2 teams. If we were advocating going from 12 teams back down to 10, you'd find teams that are sitting 11th and 10th every season in the Premiership saying, well, no, we vote against that. And that's it, done. They keep 12 teams, they get to keep their position. So it could be any 2 teams for whatever reason, but it makes it very easy to stop any real change in Scottish football.
So there we go. That was Graham. And that 11-1 voting system is something we've been touching on quite a lot recently on the podcast. So, a 90% threshold is frankly ridiculous. And it just, as we've mentioned, it just blocks change. Like, how are you meant to get things through when the threshold is that high, which it is for all the major stuff? For comparison, England, it's 70%. So 14 out of the 20 English Premier League clubs have to vote for something to get it through. So, that definitely needs to change if we're going to make improvements in Scottish football. If you want to hear more about the voting system, you can check out the episodes with Ian McMenamy and Stephen McGowan. It's covered in quite a bit more detail in those. So moving on to episode 11, which was with Ian Cole, who is a coach, used to work in Scotland and now works in Croatia and the Balkans. Now this episode has actually racked up over 35,000 listens and views, which is my highest rated podcast episode so far. And it goes without saying that Croatia is a country that, you know, we need to be aware of and we need to be looking at and learning from. So this is what he had to say when I asked him the magic wand question.
I think I would like to see our level of tactical content in our Premier League increase. I think that would probably be the main one for me, because when I watch games, I want to see teams play football. I want to see, my own understanding of football is to score as many goals as you can, to score more goals than your opponent. It's not to stop, it is to stop teams scoring. But ultimately, if I score 5 goals, you score 4, I win the match. So my dream is to see attacking football with possession, but I want to see the small teams. I want to see Livingston against St Mirren, and I want to see players play football and take the ball and go 1v1. I want to see goals and attacking football. So that would be the one thing that changes, to see a more attacking, attractive, aggressive football in the Premier League.
How far away are we, do you think? I mean, are we getting better, do you think, if you look at the Premier League, you know, or are we still stuck in quite an old school style?
I think it's got better. I think we've got to say it's got better. I think it has got better. What I think the block is maybe down below. I think, you know, in periods, Hearts and Hibs and Aberdeen do well, and you know, you get a Dundee United that come and, you know, do well for a year or two. Well, then you get a Livingston do well for 1 year, a Hamilton do well for 1 year, but it's not consistent. It's not consistently having that same style of play to be competitive and allow the kids to come through. I mean, if I go back to the stat in Croatia, you know, 75 players played. It's an average of 7.5 per team. I would love to see Scottish football with Scottish players playing attractive, free scoring football, where the players don't have fear to take the ball and to play. They don't have fear. And I want to see the crowds cheer for 1v1 when the player goes past the player, not when the player tackles the player. I don't want to see the crowd go crazy when we win a header. I want to see the crowd go crazy when we play a nice pass like Messi. This is what I would like to see, is to bring back passion and love of a great style of football play. You know, where we take on players 1v1, we make that final pass, we're shooting on goal. You know, it's attractive football. And I think it was at that before. I think we lost our way and became blood and thunder and heart and, you know, die on the pitch and blood on the shirt. I think we've come through that now, and I think it's got better. I think the players are of a better standard. But I think we need to make them more creative and more willing to play a level of football that can compete at the highest level, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the national team, a lot of the players play down south or play abroad. So their exposure is to a different level of football, a different style of football.
Yeah.
You know, even Arsene Wenger recently did a blueprint on the future of football. You know, and he spoke about the average level of players, the lack of creativity, the lack of strikers. He also spoke about we need to bring back street football. We need to bring back position-specific work. So if we look at those 5 things, you know, lack of strikers, lack of creativity, average level of players, this is around the world. It's not just Scotland. He talked about bringing back street football. He talked about bringing back position-specific football. Now, if I look at Croatian football has street football. They have strikers. They don't have a lack of creativity. They don't have an average level of player, and they do a lot of position-specific work. So the 5 things that Arsene Wenger said was a blueprint for football, the future of football. I think Croatia are ahead of the curve. So I know I'm really giving up a big thumbs up here to Croatian football, but it's really my, I've worked in Bulgaria, I've worked in Romania, I've worked in Scotland. I don't want to be disrespectful to our home country, but I think we can make big strides. I think we can not tackle the problem. I think we can make our football better. It's not a problem. We need to find a solution.
So that was Ian, and it goes without saying, we need to be looking at the likes of Croatia and working out what they are doing well. He mentioned a stat in there, which was that on the weekend before we recorded, there were 75 Croats who played in the top flight in Croatia. And that's a top flight of just 10 teams. So on average, in each team, there were 7.5 homegrown players playing. Now that is absolutely staggering and such a huge contrast to Scotland. See earlier chat on homegrown player rule. So, in the Scottish Premiership, sometimes you have teams with no Scottish players. Maybe it'll get up to maybe 5 or 6, but you'll struggle to see anything near the Croatian numbers. They are giving their own players a chance, and they are not afraid to stick young Croats into the team at 16, at 17, and then, once they've had a couple of years playing in the Croatian top flight, they will more than happily move them on to a top 5 league in Europe. That is a great episode and a massive eye-opener. So go check it out if you haven't listened to it already. I learned a lot, as hopefully did the 35,000 others. And so moving on to episode 13, which was with Aberdeen fan Erin Grieve. Here's what she said to the Magic Wand question.
A couple of things. One, 20's plenty campaign I quite like. I do think we should be capping ticket prices. They're getting out of hand. And also I kind of think, well, realistically, the smaller clubs need money more, don't they? So should they not charge more and the other ones less? They've got a cap on European away games, €25. And Finland have charged that because that was like £22 or something. Greece have not, it was like £12. We have, but we've not applied it to the home fan tickets. So interesting. I do like I think Celtic, I think, started, did they not? Ironically, given they've just paid £33 to go and sit behind a pillar. But I think that is not a bad campaign, and I wouldn't mind seeing that take off more. I mean, if it was all, but suddenly, we're currently charging 30, so that's more people will go. More people will go. You'll sell more tickets. You also the whole away support thing with percentages and the Hearts. Look what Hearts are doing. I don't think you have to give away your whole stadium, and I think some Mirren have done really well to change what they were doing. But also, what we're going to do is have no away fans. That's what we're getting to. It's pointless. So I think that needs to be probably looked at, because there's a minimum for the cups and things. And I know in Europe there's a lot of places have a minimum amount. I think England do as well, do they not? So they're not 5% or it's 3,000, whatever's higher. So I think we need to look at that. Big thing I think is, I've thought about this for a while, and I thought, is it the pies? But the pies are all right. I think the league, I think we need to have more than 12 teams. I think probably most people would agree that we are. I think we're underselling Scottish football slightly by making it boring, but it's quite repetitive. Oh, sorry. We played Rangers 7 times a couple of seasons ago because we played them 4 times in the league. In the League Cup, and then before they scrapped Scottish Cup replays. That was a good idea, by the way. That should have been done beforehand. But we played them twice in the Scottish Cup. Absolutely nonsense.
So there we go. That was Erin. The 20 Plenty campaign, very interesting, and definitely something I'm going to explore more in future episodes because I haven't really delved into it too much. Certainly, people shouldn't be paying 35 quid or whatever it is for an away ticket or for a home ticket, quite frankly. We need to, make it more accessible, and hopefully that will encourage more people to actually go through the turnstiles. And league reconstruction, again, in my opinion, a bit of a no-brainer. There are ways that we can do it in a smart way, in a clever way. So again, I would direct you to episode 7 with the aforementioned Graham Taylor. And moving on to our final, the final person I'm going to feature in this episode, which is with Ian McMenamy, who is the chairman of Stenhousemuir. And this is what he had to say.
Perhaps if it's a magic wand, then magic is obviously at play here. So it's one that is, maybe creeping out into the realms of the possible here. But I would like to be able to influence the brains of everybody that's involved in Scottish football, just so they can actually see that their democratisation and working together is not a bad thing. I'd like us to be able to get over that hurdle of protectionism, looking after our own interests. I'd like just those minds to perhaps be magically freed up, that there is more value in us all be able to promote the entire game and raising us all up. So I would like that little bit of mind play, I think, through my magic wand to get that to happen. And I think that would unlock so much more that could flow from that in Scottish football, that it would be transformational. So if you just stick that magic wand in the post to me, I will wave it at the next meeting.
So there we go. That is a nice one to finish on from Ian. And to be honest, that sentiment is something that has come through from every guest that I've recorded with. We need to be working together more in the interests of Scottish football as a whole. There's a phrase that was used quite early on, which was "a rising tide lifts all ships." And I think, that's the most apt way I can put it. We need to be coming together, and we need to stop this whole every club for themselves sort of thing, because it's not working, and it's been this way for decades. And look at the situation we're in now. So we need to change things. Let's come together. Let's work together to improve Scottish football. So I guess, in summary, I'd say that some things are easier to change than others. Homegrown player rule being a very easy one. But there are ways of making all of this work. There are ways of phasing things in. You can get the simple stuff done, and you can start working on the harder stuff in the background. And you know what? If we change something and it doesn't work, let's say we expand the leagues to 14 or 16 teams and it doesn't work, or it's not as good as it currently is. Do you know what? We can change it back. So, we really cannot be so terrified of change. We've got to look to the future, because if we stand still, we are only moving backwards. And I will remind you once again of my favourite quote, JFK: "Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future." So like I say, get stuck into those older episodes. They're all still relevant. I'll be back in a couple of weeks as per usual with a regular episode. Until then, wish me luck, and thank you for listening and for all your support. This podcast was produced by Edinburgh Documentary Films, which is a film and media company co-founded by me, Kieran Hennigan. So we make documentaries for TV and cinema, but we also work with companies and brands to help them tell their stories in impactful and meaningful ways. You can find out more at edinburghdocs.co.uk, and please contact me directly if you'd like to talk about any potential projects.